Hi, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to start doing some actual drawing and start working with some of the drawing aids that we mentioned in the earlier video that are controlled from the settings down the bottom of our screen. So we're going to take a look at some of that stuff right now. So I've opened up a new drawing here. And before we start, I think I want to shut off some of the things that AutoCAD has normally turned on for us, because having them off and turning them back on might be a better way to demonstrate this. So you see down here, we have these little icons in the drawing aids area. Anything that's blue is turned on, anything that's gray is turned off. So I'm just going to turn everything off by clicking on it, turning it to gray, do that. And click that, and then oops, that was already off. I turned it on. So now I've got everything off down here, and we see that our screen is just a big black plain area. And that's going to be fine for us because we'll be turning stuff on as we go along. The next thing I want to do is turn off some of the kind of built-in help that AutoCAD will keep popping up as we're working. Now this stuff is helpful, but it can get in the way when we're trying to demonstrate things. So I'm going to go down to the command bar, and over on the left end you see a little thing like a wrench. Click on that. It says Input Settings, and we'll see it has all of these various things turned on about autocomplete, autocorrect, search system variables. So this is an automatic search in the help to kind of clue us to what's going on here. What I'm going to do is I'll leave that on, but I'm going to change the delay time. So the default delay is 300 milliseconds. I'm going to change that to something like, let's say, maybe 1200 milliseconds. So I'll type in 1200 and hit Enter on the keyboard. And that gives me the input, puts the command into AutoCAD. And so that's what's now set on our screen. So we won't have that in the way as we're trying to demonstrate things. So I've got all my controls, my drawing aids set up, turned off rather. Okay, so we're looking at our blank screen and ready to draw. I did just notice that up here in the corner we have our view cube popped back up, even though we had turned that off in an earlier video. So AutoCAD does that every once in a while. Sometimes things kind of pop on and off. You're not exactly sure why, but we can always go back and control that. So I'm going to go back up here to our little flat bar and turn off the view cube. So now I do have, in fact, a big open clean drawing area. Okay, so we're looking at model space, and this is where all of the drawing and designing gets done in AutoCAD. And just to check, we can look down here at the bottom, and we see that we have the model tab activated. That's in fact what we are looking at. And the model space has some properties that we should be aware of. One thing is that it is infinite, meaning we have we're not restricted by AutoCAD in terms of what the size of what we want to draw. So we could draw anything from a little microchip for a computer to an entire city plan. And AutoCAD has no problem handling either of those because the space that we're given is theoretically infinite. Also, you should note that when you draw in model space, you draw to true size, meaning there's no scaling that happens here when we draw. So if we draw something that is supposed to be 10 feet long, it will in fact be 10 feet long. Or if it's 1,000 feet long or 1,000 miles long, it will in fact be just that. So that's a couple of the properties that we have in model space. And the way model space is organized is that it's a giant Cartesian grid. So if I have another drawing here that I can open up and we can take a look at. I'll go back to my Start tab. And so this is what model space essentially, how it essentially is organized. We have an origin at 0, 0, and we have an X and a Y axis. The X axis runs horizontal, the Y axis runs vertical. And then every point in model space has coordinates. So very typically, or very simply here, we have 0, 0 for the origin, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0 for points along the x-axis, or 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3 for points along the y-axis, and then anything obviously in between. So typically when AutoCAD opens and we're working, we're shown model space, we're looking in this area right here. So we're looking in this upper right quadrant of the screen where everything essentially is a positive value. But we're not restricted to that area. We could draw in any of these areas, and the origin can be in the center of our screen, could be up in the upper right, or anywhere else. We could draw in any of these areas. But this is just the way the model space is organized. just like a typical Cartesian grid, which you might remember back from algebra class in high school. So let's go back to our drawing screen, and we see that little symbol, that XY, is down here in the lower left-hand corner, and that in our because we are in that upper right-hand quadrant, that in fact marks the origin for us, the 0, 0. And one way I can demonstrate that is by starting with the line command. So we talked earlier about how we can access commands from the ribbon up here, but I'm going to go back to an old-fashioned way that is still very functional in AutoCAD and still very useful, and that's simply putting commands in on the command line. And you can do that simply by typing in. So I'm going to start the line command. I'm going to type in L. Notice what happens. The L appears down here, and then because I guess I wasn't fast enough, we have a whole bunch of help that popped up, and this was one of the things I was trying to control. I guess the 1200 is not long enough. So anything, all the commands and settings that begin with the letter L pop up here, but I just simply want the line command, so I'm going to go up and accept that. And notice what happens is that down here on the command line, it prompts us. It says we're in the line command and we should specify our first point. Now I could just click anywhere on the screen and start drawing my my line. Notice that as I'm doing that and moving around down here, our coordinate display is changing because it's showing us the location of our cursor. But I want to be a little bit more accurate than this, so I'm going to get out of the command, hit escape, and I'm going to type in the letter U. Again, pops up down here on the command line, and U is simply undo. Hit enter. There. It removes or undoes the entire line command that we just did there. So what I want to do is draw a little more accurately and use that as a way to showing you kind of how this is set up. So if I type in the letter L again and hit enter, the line command starts. It's displayed down here on the command line, the prompt, specify first point, and instead of just clicking anywhere on the screen, I'm going to put in an actual XY coordinate. So I'm going to type in 0, 0, and again that appears down there on the command line. We see it, and I can hit enter. And now we're drawing a line, and the very first point of the line is at the origin, is at 0, 0. Okay, so that is how our environment is set up. But notice here that as I'm drawing this, I'm kind of in free fall here, free floating. My cursor is going everywhere. I can go at any angle, any distance, and it's kind of hard to tell if I want to draw something accurately just what's going on. This is where our drawing aids come in to help us. So while I'm kind of free falling here or just flying around the screen, if I get down here to my drawing aids list, our bar down here on the status bar, and if I go to this one that just shows up as a little right angle, hold my cursor over it, it tells me this is ortho mode. And it tells you it restricts cursor orthogonally, and right now it's off. Also notice that next to the word ortho mode is F8. F8 is a function key. You can turn this on or off by hitting the F8 key on your keyboard. So right now I'm just going to click on this, and what it has done is done just what it's supposed to do. It restricts my cursor into moving just simply horizontally or simply vertically from the 0, 0. Now, one of the ways that I can draw accurately using this is that as I'm pulling, say, in that horizontal direction, notice the readout right next to my cursor. It tells me that I'm moving orthogonally, and it's giving me a distance, and it's showing me that I'm moving at 0 degrees. So that's another property of model space that we should look at and be aware of. So I'm going to go back to my Start tab, and I have another little drawing here. Whoops. And I have another little drawing here, and I'll open that up. And this shows us the kind of polar coordinates that are also built into model space in AutoCAD. So for instance, we see here our origin at 0, 0, and along the x-axis in the positive direction is 0 degrees. Positive direction along the y-axis is 90 degrees. Negative along the x is 180. negative along the y is 270, or also negative 90. So positive rotation in AutoCAD is counterclockwise. So if I go this way, I'm going up 45 degrees and then 90 degrees. That's positive rotation. That's a little different than you might find in some other graphics programs, which positive rotation is clockwise. In AutoCAD, by default, it's counterclockwise. So that's just something to be aware of. So if I go back to my drawing, whoops, we got out of our command. That's okay. So because as I was moving around on the tabs up top there, it canceled my command. So all I have to do is type in L, enter, and the line command starts again, 0, 0, enter. And now as I'm dragging along this distance, as we said before, we see the readout, and I can put in a distance. So let's say if I put in 30. And the line now becomes 30 units long, or in this case 30 inches, and stops. But now I can do another segment, and you'll see that I am drawing up in a vertical direction 90, the positive direction. And just like we did before, I can just type in a distance, let's say 18. Again, as I'm typing, notice down on the command line the 18 appears. And I can hit enter. And now I've got a vertical line that's 18 units, or 18 inches long in this case. And again, let's say go back, and we can see that on the cursor, the readout, it's telling us that I'm moving it 180 degrees, or in the negative direction along the x-axis. And I can put in, say, the 30 like I did before. And now the other option I have here, because I'm in the middle of essentially constructing a rectangle out of lines, if we look down on the command line, it's prompting us to do next point, or we see these little square brackets here. And in these square brackets, I have a couple of options. One is close and one is undo. And you can just activate those by typing in the letters that they begin with. So you'll notice that the C and the U are capital, and in this case they're highlighted blue. And if I want to undo that last line segment that I did, I could type in U, hit enter, and now I'm back to where I was before. But in fact I do want that line there, so I'm going to put it back in, drag this way, and put in the 30. But the other thing I can do is, that's showing me as a prompt down on my command line, is I can close this object, meaning take the line back to the very first point we started at. So to do that, I can just type in the C that we have down here in our little square brackets. Type in C and enter, and now we've closed the rectangle. So now our drawing is complete, and there's our first drawing in AutoCAD, a simple rectangle. But that was a good example of how you work with the interface using the command line. And if I hit the F2 key, it opens up the AutoCAD text window, which essentially is the history of everything that's gone on the command line. So here, we take a look at this, we see that here's a whole bunch of commands that we have done, and here's our commands to do the rectangle. So we see the U command to undo some lines, and then the actual commands that we put in here to draw the rectangle. So that's how the command line works. Putting in the commands, and the command line prompts you to put in some more information, and then gives you options by placing things in those little square brackets that we saw earlier. Okay, so that's one way, and hit the F2 key to close that. That was one way to draw that object. Let's turn on a couple of the other controls that we have here. Go back down to our status bar and the drawing aids, and the first one here, right next to the, just to the right of the word model, is the drawing grid. And right now it's off, and all that really does for us is in fact just turn on the grid. And here it's when I turn that on, it displays it. So that really doesn't give us so much control over drawing, but it just gives us a visual as to what's going on the screen and where we are on the screen in relation to points on this in model space. The other thing right next to that drawing grid is something called snap mode. And if I turn that on, and I'm going to turn off the ortho that we had on before, so I'm not restricted to just drawing horizontally or vertically. But with snap mode on, essentially you are, because what snap mode does is it locks you into moving in certain increments on the screen. And how can we tell what those increments are? A couple ways. I can right click on the little grid there that shows the icon for snap mode, and you'll see in the pop-up one of the options I have is snap settings. So if I click on that, I get a dialog, and right now it tells me here on the tab called Snap and Grid that my snap is on, and that the snap X spacing is 0.5 or 1/2 inch, and snap Y spacing is 0.5 or 1/2 inch, and it's locked into equal X and Y, so that's fine. And that's what we want. The other side of this dialog is the grid, and so we can tell what our grid spacing is right now. So our X and Y grid spacing is 0.5 and 0.5 also. Why don't we change that just so we get an example of what happens when we do. I'm going to change that to 1 on the X and 1 on the Y, and go OK. And what you'll see in the background is in fact the grid changes. So it's a larger spacing now in our model space display. All right, but we have the snap on, and it's set to 1/2 inch. So let's do something. Let's do another simple rectangle by using the line command, but this time we'll be being controlled by the snap mode that's down here turned on our status bar. So I'm going to start the line command, type in L, enter. And first point, this time I'll put in, say, 2, 2, just so that we're not right on top of the other rectangle that we have. And there our line starts at 2.2, and as I'm dragging it, it's a little hard to see here because we're probably zoomed out too far. So I'm going to use the wheel on my mouse and roll that in a little bit so that we're a little closer. And then I'm going to pan by holding the wheel in, pressing the wheel in, and it allows me to pan. And now that we're zoomed in a little bit, what you'll see a little more clearly is that in fact our cursor is snapping to 1/2 inch points along our grid here. And if you remember, when we were in the grid and snap control dialog, we in fact had set the grid to 1 inch. So you'll see that the cursor snaps in at the half point between each of those grid lines. So one thing I can do here is drag this along horizontally, and it's being forced to snap to the grid points, or the 1/2 inch points rather, in the snap mode. And I can do it at any angle, but it's hard to kind of understand what's happening if you want to draw a line accurately, give an accurate distance. But the snap mode does allow you to understand your increment that you're moving along. And one way we can control that is if we go down here to the drawing coordinates, and we right click on that, and you'll see that right now it's set to specific and relative. If we, or rather it's set to absolute. If we turn on relative, notice that the display changes, and it tells us how far we have moved in a specific direction. So right now, looking down at that line, or down at the coordinates display, it says that I've moved 12 inches, 12.5, 13 in the 0 degree direction, so along the positive x-axis. So I can continue along here and just decide that I'm going to stop, say, at 15, and then click. And now I can be moving up, and my coordinate display says that I've gone up 4.5, 5, 6 inches along. Let's go to 5.5 just to be different. Go to 5.5 at 90 degrees, so 90 degrees vertical along the y-axis. Click there, come back, and just to be a little different, let's say we'll go 8 inches along the 180, along the x-axis and the 180 degree, or negative x. We'll click there. Let's come down 270, 2.5 inches, 270, which is in the negative y. Click there, and come over here, and we can very easily see that we've lined up with the end of our line there. We can click there, and just like we've done before, we can type in C and hit enter and close. So now we've closed our little object, and we've drawn it accurately by using the snap mode on the screen. So now we completed our other little unique geometric object there. Not quite a rectangle, but something interesting nonetheless, I think. And during the course of that drawing, we did use a zoom. So let's talk a little bit about the zoom command and how we get around the screen. During that last drawing session, we used the mouse and the central wheel or scroll wheel on the mouse to do the zooming. So if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, which I think most people do these days, if you roll the wheel forward or down, you zoom in. And if you roll the wheel back, you zoom out. If you squeeze the wheel, push it in like you're pressing it like a button, then it becomes a pan, and you'll see the little hand appears on the screen, and you can just drag your drawing around wherever you need to place it on your screen. The other thing you can do is if you don't have any other command going and you right click, you'll see that you have a bunch of options appear here in a pop-up window, and one of them is in fact zoom. And if you click zoom, you see that your cursor turns into a little magnifying glass, and when it's in that state, you can just use your regular left mouse button, and if you press that down and push up, you will zoom in, or pull down on your mouse and you will zoom out. The other thing you can do while it's in this state, while you see the little hourglass icon, which means you're in the zoom mode, is right click again. And a different menu pops up, and you'll see you have some other options here. One is Zoom Window, Zoom Original, and Zoom Extents. So let's click on Zoom Extents, and you'll see what happens is the screen will zoom out to include all of the drawing objects you have on your screen, meaning it zooms out to the extents of the actual drawing that's been done here. Now, if I want to back out a little further, I can hold down my left mouse button and pull, and I can see that I've gone out even further, and I can see fully the big rectangle that we drew in our little geometric object that we just completed in the last drawing session. And the other thing we can do here, while we still have our magnifying glass up and we're still in the zoom mode, if I right-click, one of the other options we see on the pop-up is Zoom Window. So if I click on that, you'll see the icon changes a little bit, still has the magnifying glass with a little box next to it, and what it wants us to do is click and drag a window around the area that we want to zoom into. So we click on that, drag, and then hold and drag, and then release it, and we get zoomed into specifically the area we wanted to see. So in this case, it's that step on the little geometric object that we drew earlier. And again, if I want to right-click and go to Zoom Extents, we're back out to seeing the entire drawings that we have here, the big rectangle and the small geometric object. So zooming around the screen can happen many different ways in AutoCAD. If I want to get out of this zoom mode right now, right-click, and sure enough, one of the options is exit, and then I'm back to my regular drawing cursor, and I can continue drawing on the screen. Other ways that I can enter the zoom mode by using the command line is by typing in the commands themselves. So if I want to do a zoom window now without doing a right-click, I can type in Z, hit enter, and notice on the command line, well, a couple things happen. Notice that my cursor changes with having the little magnifying glass next to it, telling me I'm in the zoom mode. And if I look down on the command line, you'll see that zoom has a bunch of options in these square brackets. I can do zoom all, zoom center, zoom dynamic, zoom extents, and sure enough, zoom window. The default is in these angle brackets, and that's typical of all the commands you'll see on the command line. Any default, meaning the value AutoCAD will use right now, is in the angle bracket, and the options are in the square brackets that we're seeing right here. So the default being real time, meaning that if I just press the window and drag, I will zoom in to that area that I just surrounded as a window, which is not so good here because I'm in the I just zoomed into a blank area. And notice that once I do that, the zoom command ends. So to get back into it, I just hit Z, enter, and you'll see here that my cursor is jumping around because we're in that snap mode that we set up before. So it's going to snap to those increments, those half-inch increments. But down here on the command line, you'll see that while I'm in the zoom command, again, the options, and one of the options is extents. I can type in E, hit enter, and there I'm back out to seeing my entire drawing, the entire extents of my drawing. Okay, so we've done a little drawing here using the ortho mode and using the snap mode on the screen with the snap increment set. And we've drawn a couple of basic, essentially rectilinear objects. And we've done some zooming around with the zoom command so we can see our objects. All right, I want to kind of get rid of these objects so we can get into some of the other drawing aids and see how they may help us in drawing maybe some more complex objects and drawing something other than at 90 degrees. So I want to clean up my screen, and the way I'm going to do that, I can't use the undo command because I've done several commands since I've done the drawing. So I would have to go back many undos to get rid of the objects on my screen to using undo. But what I can do is use another AutoCAD command, which we haven't talked about yet, and that's simply the erase command. And when the erase command works, the way it works is by selecting our objects and then simply removing them from the screen. And one of the things you may have noticed while we've been talking here is that if I click and drag on my screen without any command going, I get these windows. If I click and then drag down to the right, you see that I get a window that's blue with a solid white line around it. If I click and drag to the left, I get a green window with a dotted line around it. So those are two different kinds of selection windows. If I click and drag to the right, I'm getting just a simple window, which means I have to surround all the objects that I want to act upon with this window. And if I go the other direction, this is called a crossing window, in which case all I have to do is touch the objects that I want with this line or surround them, either or, to select them. So if I want to erase everything on my screen here, a couple ways I can do it. Well, first of all, I want to type in E, and that's going to start the erase, and hit enter, and that starts the erase command. And notice that as soon as I do that, when I type in E and enter for the erase command, my cursor changes. It's no longer a crosshair with a little pick box, but it's just the pick box by itself. So I can go in here and just click on an individual line and say an individual line here, and then hit enter, and those lines disappear. But if I want to erase a larger group of objects, I can type in E, enter, and with my pick box not on any one object, click and drag, and you'll see I'm dragging that window, that selection window. And I can surround all of these objects here, click, and then once they're selected, they become kind of grayed out, so you know that they are selected to have a command be performed on them, in this case the erase command. And if I'm done selecting, I can hit enter, and those lines disappear. Now, just to continue through, so if I type in E again, enter, start the erase, this time I click and drag towards the left, and you'll see I have a crossing window. And here I'm just touching this line. I am not actually surrounding it like I would have to with the regular window, the blue window. And I can go up here and touch this, and I've got those two lines, so click. So now those two lines are selected to be erased. So they kind of grayed out, let you know that they've been selected as part of the selection set. Hit enter, they go away. And then last but not least, get rid of our last two lines. So type in E, enter, click, and this time I'm going to surround all the lines that I have here, click, enter, and now we're back to a clean screen, and we can start drawing again some fresh objects. We'll continue with that in our next video, so we'll see you then.